The Galactic Conclave had a tradition. Before any war began, they sent an invitation, not a peace offering, not a negotiation, an invitation to surrender, dressed up in silk language and stamped with 14 alien seals, delivered in a golden capsule the size of a refrigerator. It was their version of courtesy. You received the capsule, you bowed, you offered your resources, your territory, your future, and in return they allowed your species to continue existing in a diminished and perpetually grateful state. It was, by galactic standards, considered generous. Humanity received the capsule on a Tuesday. Director Seraphine Okafor read the contents 3 times, her dark eyes moving across the holographic translation without expression, the kind of stillness that people mistake for calm and those who know her recognize as the moment before the storm. She set the document down on the conference table of Earth's Central Command, in Geneva, in a room full of admirals, senators, scientists, and one very tired general named Brandt who had not slept in 36 hours and was already on his 4th coffee. "They want our oceans," she said. General Brandt looked up from his cup. "All of them? 70%. They will permit us to retain the remaining 30 if we agree to labor quotas, resource extraction licensing, and what they have the audacity to call a cultural diminishment protocol." A senator from the East Asian bloc cleared his throat. "Which means what exactly?" "It means," Seraphine said, "that they want us to stop being ambitious. They want us to forget we ever looked at the stars. They want our children to grow up knowing their ceiling." The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when the words spoken are too heavy to respond to immediately. Then Admiral Declan Voss, 61 years old, silver-haired, and possessed of a vocabulary that could strip paint at 50 meters, leaned forward and said something that would technically not be appropriate to repeat in formal records. But everyone in that room agreed with the sentiment entirely. The conclave represented 47 species. Their combined fleets numbered in the thousands. The fastest of their warships could cross a solar system in what humans called an afternoon. They had weapons that burned atmospheres, technology that bent gravity like taffy, and a collective age of civilization that made humanity look like a species that had just recently discovered the wheel, which, relatively speaking, they had. Earth had 6 functional warships. 6. Named after virtues because someone in the shipyard naming committee had been feeling poetic. Courage, endurance, fortitude, patience, resolve, and one called Audacity, which the crew had quietly renamed among themselves as something considerably less dignified but considerably more accurate. What Earth also had, which the conclave did not yet understand, was Ren Calloway. He was 34 years old, lean in the way of someone who forgets to eat when thinking, with sand-colored hair that was always slightly too long and eyes the color of deep water, the kind of blue that looks almost gray until the light hits it right. He had 3 degrees. 2 of which were in fields that did not technically exist until he invented them. He spoke 11 languages, 7 of which were alien, and he had a habit of pausing mid-sentence when an idea arrived that interested him more than the conversation he was already in. He was also, by unanimous agreement of everyone who had worked with him, insufferable, not cruel, not arrogant in the loud way. He was insufferable in the specific manner of someone who is almost always right and does not bother pretending otherwise. He had a sarcasm so dry it could dehydrate a rainforest, and a patience for bureaucracy that registered somewhere between 0 and -40. Seraphine had recruited him personally, 2 years before the capsule arrived, when she read his theoretical paper on conclave psychology entitled "Why the Galaxy's Dominant Species Are Dominant and Why That Will Eventually Work Against Them," which he had self-published because no peer-reviewed journal would touch it. She had called him on a Wednesday morning, and the first thing he had said to her was, "You read it. So either you're very smart or you're very desperate." "Which is it?" She had replied. "Both." He had said, "Good, those are the only 2 qualifications I respect." They had worked together for 24 months, during which time Ren had mapped every known conclave species, catalogued their psychological blind spots, modeled their decision trees, built a predictive framework that her own senior analysts called guesswork until it predicted 3 consecutive political moves within the conclave, with an accuracy that made those same analysts go very quiet. He had done all of this in a converted warehouse outside of Nairobi that smelled permanently of strong coffee and whiteboard markers, surrounded by 3 assistants who worshipped him, 2 cats he ignored, and a wall covered in so many annotated maps and connection strings that visitors sometimes just stood in the doorway and stared. When the capsule arrived and Seraphine called an emergency session of Earth's Defense Council, she already knew what she was going to propose. She knew it would be rejected. She knew she would propose it anyway. "We send 1 person," she said. 1. We do not send a fleet because we do not have a fleet worth sending. We do not send a committee because committees negotiate by compromise, and we cannot afford to give anything away. We send a single individual with full diplomatic authority and zero instructions on how to use it. The room reacted roughly as expected. Admiral Voss looked like she had suggested feeding the council members to the conclave as an appetizer. General Brandt set down his coffee for the first time in 6 hours. The senator from the East Asian bloc made a noise that was not technically a word but communicated his feelings thoroughly. "You want to send one human being," Brandt said slowly, "to face the 47 species governing body of the known galaxy." "Yes, and this one person is supposed to do what, exactly?" Seraphine smiled, and it was the smile of someone who has already run the numbers. "Win." There was a pause. "Who?" Voss asked. The door at the end of the room opened, and Ren Calloway walked in, already eating an apple, looking around the room with the mild interest of someone who has arrived at a party they did not particularly want to attend but felt obligated to show up for. "Am I late?" he said. "I feel like I'm late. You all have the face of people who have been arguing for at least 2 hours. Hour and 40 minutes, Seraphine said. "Close enough." He pulled out a chair, sat down, and looked at Admiral Voss. "I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that sending one man is suicide." Voss stared at him. "It is suicide, only if they kill me," Ren said pleasantly. "And they won't. Not immediately. They'll be too busy laughing." He was right about that. When the conclave received the message that Earth's response to the Golden Capsule was a single diplomatic representative traveling alone aboard a modified cargo shuttle that had generously seen better days, the reaction across 47 species was something that translated, imperfectly but close enough, as hilarity. The Dravathi, who looked like someone had scaled up a mantis and given it a law degree, found it delightful in the same way a cat finds a mouse delightful, which is to say, not out of affection. The Sulhari, massive beings of layered silicate and slow, grinding intelligence, registered it as an insult so profound it looped back around to entertainment. And the Veth Council, the innermost circle of the conclave, 7 beings so ancient and so powerful they had stopped counting their age in years and started counting in civilizations, reviewed the transmission from Earth, and for the first time in recorded history, one of them laughed out loud. The laughter reached Ren's shuttle as a second-hand account from the conclave's own communications network, which he had been passively tapping since he left Earth's orbital perimeter. He read the report over his morning protein bar with no visible reaction beyond a slow blink and a slight tilt of the head. "Good," he said, to nobody in particular, since he was alone. "Laughing people make mistakes." He docked at Conclave Station Vithara 7 days later. The station was a structure so large it had its own weather systems, so old that some of its interior corridors had ecosystems, and so politically complicated that its directory alone was a document the length of a novel. He walked down the docking tube with a single bag over one shoulder, nodded politely at the 6-member security escort that was definitely there to intimidate him and mostly just served to illustrate how seriously they were not taking him, and made his first request. He asked for tea. Not a dramatic entrance, not a statement of intent, not a posture of defiance. Tea. The Dravathi guard assigned to escort him to the pre-session holding chamber processed this for 3 full seconds before responding that the station had no human dietary provisions. Ren looked at him with genuine curiosity. A station housing representatives from 47 species, some of whom metabolize gases and 2 of whom literally eat light. "Has nothing I can drink?" The guard's mandibles shifted in a way that might have indicated embarrassment. "There is water." "Water is fine," Ren said. "I was just checking how thorough the disrespect was going to be." The guard did not respond to that. Ren smiled and followed him down the corridor, cataloging everything. The geometry of the hallways, the badge configurations of passers-by, the micro-expressions in alien faces that served the same social function as human tells. By the time he reached the holding chamber, he had learned more about Conclave Station Vithara than the entire first briefing document his team had assembled. The formal session was scheduled for the following morning. 47 delegations, 1 human. The preliminary reception was that same evening, which was technically optional, and which every seasoned diplomat used to read the room before the real confrontation. Ren attended in his second-best jacket, which was also his only other jacket, and spent 2.5 hours doing something that looked from the outside like socializing and was in fact the most concentrated intelligence gathering he had ever performed in his life. He was charming in the way of someone who has studied charm as a functional tool rather than a social grace. He asked questions that seemed idle and were surgical. He complimented ships he had no interest in. He expressed polite curiosity about species traditions in a manner that required his hosts to explain themselves, which people and aliens alike always want to do, and in explaining themselves, They revealed the gaps between what they believed and what was true. He found 4 of them that night. 4 pressure points in the seemingly monolithic authority of the conclave. 4 places where the 47 were not, in fact, united. He tucked each one away and said nothing. The Dravathi lead ambassador, a being named Setharak who was approximately the size of a pony and radiated the particular kind of authority that comes from never being challenged, found Ren at the beverage table at the end of the evening and looked at him for a long, assessing moment. "You are smaller than expected," Setharak said. "We all are," Ren replied pleasantly. "Until we are not." Setharak's head tilted at a precise angle. "That is either profound or it is meaningless." "Tomorrow morning," Ren said, raising his water glass in a small toast. "You'll know which." He went back to his quarters, pulled out a battered notebook he carried everywhere, and wrote for 3 hours straight. When he finally slept, it was with the quiet of a man who has already made his decision and is simply waiting for the world to catch up. The next morning, he walked into the grand chamber of the conclave, a space designed to make visitors feel the full weight of 47 civilizations staring down at them from curved, tiered galleries, and sat down in the single chair placed at the center of the floor like a punctuation mark at the end of a very long sentence. Setharak opened the proceedings from the high bench with the formal reading of Earth's invitation to surrender, which lasted 11 minutes and was delivered with the professional satisfaction of someone who has done this before and expects the same result. When it was over, Setharak looked down at the single human in the single chair. "Does the representative of Earth accept the terms of the conclave's generous provision?" Ren Calloway looked up at 47 delegations, the combined military and political power of the known galaxy, and said, with complete calm, "No." There was a silence. Then he said something else. Something that no human diplomat, no general, no senator had authorized, because it had never been in any plan, because it was not a negotiation move or a gambit or a tactic. It was the truth, delivered with the quiet precision of a scalpel. "But before we discuss what Earth will and will not accept," he said, "I would like to address the matter of the conclave's 14th fleet, specifically where it went." The silence that followed was of an entirely different quality, because the 14th fleet had disappeared 3 months ago. The conclave had told no one. It was classified at the highest possible level, the kind of secret held by only the most senior members of the Veth Council. The official position was that the fleet was on a deep survey mission. The truth, which no human should have known, which no human could have known, was that it had simply ceased to exist somewhere beyond the Vithara perimeter, with no distress signal and no wreckage. And Ren Calloway had just mentioned it, in open session, in front of 47 delegations, most of whom were hearing it for the first time. Setharak's composure did not shatter. It was too carefully constructed for that. But something behind the ambassador's eyes changed, and every being in that chamber felt the temperature of the room shift. "Where," Setharak said very quietly, "did you obtain that information?" Ren looked up at the high bench with the mild expression of a man who has been waiting patiently for this exact moment. "The same place," he said, "that your 13th fleet disappeared, and your 11th, and the 6 patrol vessels along the Vithara border that you have not yet realized are gone." The cost of laughing. The chamber did not erupt. That was the thing about power. True power does not erupt. It contracts. Every delegation leaned inward at once, a subtle gravitational pull of sudden attention, and the 7 members of the Veth Council, seated above all others in a gallery so elevated it was barely visible from the floor, went entirely, completely still. Setharak's voice when it came was precise as a blade. "You will explain yourself." Ren stood. He had been sitting because sitting had been the appropriate posture for a supplicant, and he was done being a supplicant. 3 months ago, he said, the conclave's 14th fleet, 26 vessels, entered the deep survey corridor beyond Vithara Station and never came out. You attributed it to a navigation anomaly. Your own analysts privately disagreed, but the political cost of admitting a fleet had simply vanished was too high, so you buried it. He paused. 11 months before that, the 13th fleet suffered an identical fate. You attributed that to an experimental drive failure. 2 years before that, the 11th, before that, the 8 patrol vessels, before that, the research station at Corridor 12, which you told the broader conclave was decommissioned due to funding reallocation. The sound in the chamber was not silence. It was the specific acoustic of 47 delegations holding their breath simultaneously. Ren let it sit for exactly 4 seconds, which was long enough to be uncomfortable and short enough to prevent interruption. Something has been removing conclave military assets from the outer perimeter for 4 years, he continued. You do not know what it is. You do not know where it originates. You do not know how it operates. You have lost thousands of crew members, dozens of vessels, and a research station, and the only reason the wider conclave does not know is because the Veth Council has been managing the information to prevent panic. He looked up toward that barely visible gallery. How am I doing so far? No answer came from above, which was, itself, an answer. Admiral Voss had once told Wren that his greatest weapon was the ability to make silence work for him. She had said it as a complaint, he had taken it as a compliment. He turned slowly, addressing the broader chamber now rather than the high bench. The species represented here today came to receive Earth's surrender. You brought the full authority of the conclave, the combined weight of 47 civilizations and 1,000 years of established dominance. You expected a small, frightened species to bow because they had no choice. He paused. You were correct that we have no fleet. You were incorrect about whether that matters. A Sulhari delegate, one of the silicate beings, spoke for the first time. Its voice was a grinding, resonant thing that human ears processed as sound approximately a half-second after it occurred. What are you suggesting? Wren said it simply. I know what is taking your fleets. The chamber shattered into sound. Not the dignified murmur of deliberation, but actual noise. The particular cacophony of 47 species reacting to information simultaneously, each in their own register, creating an audio landscape that was genuinely dizzying even for someone who had prepared for it. Setharak brought down a gavel the size of a dining table. Order returned with the grudging speed of a tide. Speak carefully, Setharak said. I always do, Wren replied. You just haven't been paying attention to what I'm saying. He pulled a data tablet from his jacket and connected it to the chamber's primary display system with a cable so simple and old-fashioned that two alien technicians moved toward him instinctively before realizing he had already completed the connection. On every screen in the Grand Chamber, a map appeared. It showed the Vithara perimeter. It showed the locations of every disappeared vessel, marked in red. It showed a pattern so clear that the moment it appeared, multiple delegations emitted sounds that translated universally as recognition. Because once you saw it, you could not unsee it. The disappearances were not random. They traced a boundary, a perimeter. Something was defending a territory, and the conclave had been poking at its edges for 4 years without understanding what they were touching. They are called the Keth, Wren said. They are not in your records because they predate your records. They were ancient when the oldest of you were children. They went deep approximately 8,000 years ago. Deep meaning they withdrew from the known galaxy entirely, moved to a region of space you have mapped as uninhabitable, and built something there. He tapped the tablet. What they built is not in any database I can give you, because I have not seen it. What I can tell you is this. 3 years ago, they started noticing the conclave's expansion. They began removing threats from their perimeter. They are not at war with you, they are not even angry with you. They are simply removing obstructions, the way you remove insects from a home. The silence this time was personal. It was the silence of every being in that room understanding, possibly for the first time in a very long while, what it felt like to be smaller than something else. Wren let it breathe. Then he said, They have not touched anything human. Not one probe, not one shuttle, not one research satellite. In 4 years of removing conclave assets, nothing of human origin has been disturbed. Setharak leaned forward. Why? Because, Wren said, we reached out to them 6 months ago. The sound that erupted was not polite. It was not dignified. It was in the specific manner of beings confronted with information that overturns every assumption they held about a situation they believed they controlled. Chaotic. Seraphine Okafor, watching from Earth via encrypted relay, sat very still in the Geneva command room and permitted herself the smallest smile of her career. General Brandt, standing beside her, set down his coffee cup and said, He actually did it. He always does, she said. Back in the chamber, Wren waited for order to return, which it eventually did, driven less by the gavel and more by the collective need to hear what came next. 6 months ago, he said, Dr. Mara Salos of the University of Cape Town published a mathematical proof. You would not have noticed it. It was published in a human journal, in a field of mathematics that does not yet exist formally. But the Keth noticed it, because what Mara proved, in 47 pages of notation that took her 11 years to write, was the foundational theorem underlying the very engineering principle the Keth used to build their deep space habitats. She arrived at it independently. She arrived at it from first principles, from pure mathematics, with no access to any existing information about the Keth. He let that land. They reached out to us, Wren continued, not to us as a government or a military. They reached out to Mara. They sent a proof in response to her proof. A correction, one correction, in the same notation, which meant they had read her work closely enough to engage with it. which meant they considered her worth engaging. A delegate from a species whose name translated loosely as the Choir, beings of collective intelligence that spoke in harmonized frequencies, asked the obvious question, "Why are you telling us this?" Ren set down his tablet. "Because the Keth have agreed to a meeting, a formal one, with witnesses. They specified the conditions. The meeting must include both Earth's representative and a delegated authority from the wider conclave." He looked across the chamber. "They chose Earth because of Mara. They require the conclave because of what the conclave has been doing to their border. They want to establish terms, not for war, for a boundary agreement." He paused. "And they asked us to arrange it." This, more than anything else he had said, changed the texture of the room. Because what it meant was obvious and enormous, and nobody in that chamber could pretend it was not. The Keth, the ancient, incomprehensible force that had been casually dismantling conclave military assets for years without a declaration or a warning, had chosen Earth as their intermediary. They had not contacted the most powerful civilization in the known galaxy. They had contacted the newest, the smallest, the one that the conclave had come here today to subsume. Setharek said, very carefully, "And in exchange for your facilitation of this meeting?" Ren smiled. It was not a warm smile, it was the smile of someone who has spent 24 months preparing for exactly this moment and feels no particular need to pretend otherwise. Earth keeps its oceans, all of them. Earth retains full sovereignty, full territorial rights, and full standing as an independent civilization in the conclave. Not an affiliated species, not a client culture. A peer. "You are a species of 8 billion people with 6 warships," Setharak said. "Yes," Ren agreed. "And we're the ones the Keth called." The session recessed for 4 hours. Ren sat in an anteroom and ate a sandwich he had packed from Earth, because he had learned enough about this station to know that making a second request of the catering staff would have been both pointless and demoralizing. The sandwich was excellent. He had made it himself, at 4 in the morning, the night before departure, because the best things in life are generally done by people who did not wait for someone else to do them. Dr. Mara Salos, meanwhile, was on a second shuttle that had departed Earth 3 days after Ren's, on a trajectory that would bring her to Vithara Station approximately 6 hours from now. She was 41 years old, Kenyan Irish, possessed of a laugh that had once caused a visiting academic to spill an entire pot of coffee, and regarded by Ren as the most important human alive, an opinion he had shared with her directly, which she had responded to by telling him he was being dramatic. He had told her that was fine, someone had to be. She was bringing her proof, all 47 pages of it, plus the 14 pages of subsequent work that she had not yet published. Work that moved from the Keth's foundational theorem into applications that, if he was honest, he only understood about 60% of, and he understood most things above 90%. She was also bringing coffee, at Ren's specific request, because he had accurately predicted that by the time she arrived, he would be desperately in need of it. The conclave reconvened. Setharak presented, on behalf of the Veth Council, a modified version of their original proposal. Earth's oceans returned in full, sovereignty confirmed. Conclave standing as peer civilization, to be formalized over a transition period of what they called one cycle, which translated to approximately 18 months of human time. In exchange, Earth would coordinate the proposed meeting with the Keth, with Ren and Mara serving as primary liaisons. Ren read the document twice. He asked 2 questions, both technical, both about enforcement language. He received satisfactory answers. He signed. And then he said, "One more thing." Setharak's mandibles shifted. "We have concluded negotiations." "This is not a negotiation point," Ren said. "It is a recommendation, offered freely, from someone who has studied your civilization long enough to care about its survival." He looked up at the high bench. "When you meet the Keth, do not bring a fleet, do not bring security, do not bring anything that can be interpreted as a threat vector. Bring your best thinkers, bring your historians, bring people who are genuinely curious." He paused. "The Keth did not remove your vessels because they could not be stopped. They removed them to see how you would respond. You responded by hiding the losses and continuing to expand. That is the wrong answer." Setharak was quiet for a moment. "And what is the correct answer?" "Curiosity," Ren said. "That is always the correct answer. It is the only thing that got us here." Mara arrived at Vithara Station at 3 in the afternoon, carrying 2 bags and a thermal flask, and was met in the docking corridor by Ren, who immediately took the flask. "You could say thank you," she said. "Thank you," he said, already drinking. "The meeting went well." She looked at him. He looked like someone who had not slept in 30 hours, which was accurate, and who was nevertheless fundamentally satisfied in the way of a person who has completed something they began a long time ago. She had known him for 3 years and understood him in the way you understand someone who occupies the same peculiar frequency as you do. The frequency of finding everything interesting and most people simultaneously wonderful and exhausting. They agreed, she said. They agreed. Everything? Everything. She let out a breath that had been held. It felt like for the better part of 2 years. The Keth confirmed the meeting schedule. 2 weeks, Ren said. Neutral space, their coordinates, their conditions. They sent confirmation 4 hours ago. They addressed it to you, by the way, not to the mission, not to Earth's delegation, to you specifically by name, followed by a notation I could not fully translate but which I believe was an honorific. Mara was quiet for a moment. What kind of honorific? As best I can render it into English, Ren said. It translates to something like, she who finds what was hidden. She looked away down the corridor, at the improbable architecture of a station built by 47 species over centuries, at the beings moving through it who had come here expecting one story and had gotten a different one entirely. Her eyes were bright, which she would have attributed to the recycled air of the station if asked, and which was not, in fact, the recycled air. We actually did it, she said. You did it, Ren said. 11 years of proof, that's what did it. I just had good timing. You are occasionally humble, she said, and it is always suspicious. He handed back the flask. Keep walking. We have a debrief in 20 minutes and I want to find out if this station has anything resembling real food. They walked down the corridor of Vithara Station together, the mathematician and the strategist, the proof and the plan, 2 people from a planet that the galaxy had dismissed and then been forced to reconsider. The debrief lasted 3 hours, involved 14 conclave representatives, one very senior Veth Council observer who said almost nothing and appeared to be processing information at a rate that made the room feel slightly pressured, and one very junior Dravathi aide who had been assigned to take notes and spent most of the session looking between the 2 humans with an expression that translated roughly as, "They are much stranger than I expected," but in the way of something unexpectedly interesting rather than something threatening, which was, perhaps, the most important shift of the entire day. The formal meeting with the Keth took place 16 days later, in a region of space that most conclave charts marked as void. It was not void. It contained something so vast that the navigation computers of every vessel in the delegated fleet had to be recalibrated 3 times before they could render it accurately. It was a structure, or a series of structures, or something for which structure was not quite the right word, built from materials that did not appear in any known catalog, lit from within by something that was not light as anyone had previously defined it. Ren stood at the forward observation port of the shuttle and did not say anything for approximately 90 seconds, which was the longest he had gone without speaking since the day Seraphine had called him. Mara stood beside him. I know, she said, although he had not spoken. The Keth, when they came as a single representative. Meeting 1. They had specified Mara. She walked through the designated contact corridor with the calm of someone who has spent 11 years working toward a moment and refused to be overwhelmed by its arrival, and she carried her 47 pages and her 14 additional pages and her flask of coffee, because she was practical above all else. The meeting lasted 9 hours. Ren monitored from the shuttle. The conclave delegation monitored from their vessels. Nobody interfered. Nobody sent messages. They waited, in the way you wait when you understand that something important is happening and your job is simply not to break it. When Mara came back, she was quiet in the specific way of someone who has seen something that will take time to become language. She sat down across from Ren and set the flask on the table between them and said nothing for a while. He waited. They are lonely, she said finally. 8,000 years in deep space, and they are profoundly specifically lonely. Not for company in the way we mean it. They have each other. They are lonely for, I think, the discovery of something new, and they had been watching us, from the deep, for a while. How long a while? She looked at him. Long enough to see us come down from the trees. He absorbed that. They did not take the conclave vessels out of malice, she continued. They took them because the conclave was expanding toward a particular region, a specific corridor, and in that corridor is something they have been protecting for 8,000 years. They didn't want a war. They wanted a door closed. And now, she said, they want to open a different one. She picked up the flask, looked at it for a moment, set it back down. They gave me a coordinate. 1. They said it is a place where the proof leads next. They said they have known this coordinate for 2,000 years and have been waiting for someone to arrive at the mathematics independently. She paused. They want to go there together. Ren sat back. The full weight of this moved through him slowly, the way significant things do when they are finally real rather than theoretical. An 8,000-year-old civilization has been waiting 2,000 years for a mathematician from Cape Town. From Cape Town, Mara confirmed. And they want us to come with them. They want humans to come with them. They specified humans. He thought about Seraphine, back in Geneva, watching the relay feed. He thought about General Brandt and his coffee and his exhausted face. He thought about 6 ships named after virtues, and a 7th one called something impolite, and a species that had looked at the full authority of the known galaxy and sent one person with a notebook. He thought about a young Mara Salos, beginning a proof that had no field yet to belong to, riding toward an answer she could not yet see, sustained for 11 years by nothing but the conviction that the mathematics was there, that it had to be there, that something true was waiting to be found. When do they want to leave? He said. That, Mara said, picking up the flask at last, is the interesting part. She looked at him over the rim, and he recognized the expression, the one she wore when she had arrived at something extraordinary and was enjoying the last moment before it ceased to be hers alone. They said the word that translates to now. Outside the observation port, the impossible structure of the Keth habitat pulsed with its interior light, steady and patient and ancient, and the void that was not void held its breath around it. And somewhere in a conference room in Geneva, Seraphine Okafor pressed her fingertips together and allowed herself, for the first time in 2 years, to feel something she had almost stopped believing in. Not safety. Not victory. Something older and more essential than either. Hope. The galaxy had laughed when humanity sent one man. Then fleets started disappearing. Then a mathematician wrote a proof that crossed 8,000 years. Then the oldest thing in the dark reached back, and humanity, characteristically, said yes.